Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Lunch Tech in Chat. I've got my friend William here. We're going to be talking about lots of things that are happening around the world, like the elections in the US that impacts everything that we know about crypto, investment, AI. We're going to talk a little bit about the superstar Sam Altman that is always up there, and Elon Musk. Those are the names that everybody loves to talk about. NVIDIA. So stay with us. Lots of cool content for today, and let's get into it. William.
Oh, how are things?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. Yeah, really busy last few days. Haven't taken my head out of the monitor, just not only following the things that actually are happening in the market, but of course, I couldn't get away from the advancements in the US elections, and now that they are out. The market and the technology developments haven't stopped. So yeah, we have lots to talk about.
Yeah, lots of cool stuff. And I would like to ask you guys that do listen to us, if you have ideas on things that we should be talking about, please leave in the comments. There's so much going around, and I think it's really good if we can listen from you guys. So the first thing that I wanted to say is it's not a massive news, but OpenAI and Sam Altman, they secured the URL chat.com. Now, if you put chat.com, it goes into ChatGPT. This chat.com was first registered in 1996. And then the HubSpot co-founder, Damesh Shah, he paid a lot of money to keep this domain last year.
But did have the domain from the very beginning, like pre-internet boom times?
Well, yeah, they bought it in 1996. So he bought it.
Okay.
So this guy from HubSpot, he bought it last year.
Okay.
And he paid a lot of money on it. Yeah. So he probably knew that he was going to resell it to OpenAI or someone like that.
Maybe.
And now OpenAI and Sam Altman just bought it. They probably pay a lot of money on it as well. So the guy probably made some money, I would expect.
Yeah.
And now you can go on chat.com and go to ChatGPT.
It's really cool. I think some of these tech companies just want to be able to create that moat and reinforce, and then kind of like create the barrier to entry is actually to everybody else. So that makes sense. It's a branding exercise, I suppose.
Yeah. On the OpenAI world, we now have web search that is available from ChatGPT. Web search works similar to Perplexity for people that have been using Perplexity. So you go into ChatGPT, and then there's a new button now that you can use to search stuff on the web. And then you can put stuff, it searches, scrape the websites, and give you the answers. So nothing new. It works as well as Perplexity. So I think it's a functionality that they're just catching up to.
What about hallucinations of those web searches? Is it actually getting pretty good at not hallucinating so much and actually kind of like indexing on the content?
Yeah. I think for the web search is a lot more reliable on hallucination because actually using the data from the scraped website, and it gives you all the references back. So it's quite cool. Have you used Perplexity before?
I have used Perplexity, but I didn't find, it's been a little while since actually kind of like I've used Perplexity now. And back when I did use a little bit was probably 3 to 6 months ago. I didn't find it was particularly good in terms of the outputs in the areas that I was looking for. So that's probably why I kind of like dropped from using more often, because I wanted actually a higher quality content, and there was actually providing actually that well indexed content.
But so you went back to Google.
Well, went back to Google, used, some of the Google tools that we talked about before here. By the way, actually there's quite a few tools actually in the Google actually Labs ecosystem that actually been exploring in the last little while. And but anyways, there are other tools for web scraping and web searching.
Yeah, I think
that I found that was actually a bit more more appropriate for actually.
I think the ChatGPT works quite well. Try it out, see what you think, and then maybe next time you can talk about it.
So that's the thing, kind of like ChatGPT. I went on it relatively recently, with also like the goal of web searching, but I didn't go to the search part. It was just like the general GPT, using the O model, the OpenAI model, but I was actually looking for very specific academic kind of research. That was, using academic papers and all that kind of stuff, because I wanted actually a higher level. And ChatGPT, it was referencing all sorts of academic papers that either didn't exist, or the links were completely wrong and referencing to some random stuff.
Yeah. So it has like a web search out of the box that when you're using GPT-4.
Yeah.
But now when you click on the button for the web search, it's actually doing web search and scraping. So the results are a lot better.
Right.
Try that out.
Yeah.
See what you think.
I'll try it out. Yeah. I'll see how it goes. But
and that takes me to the next topic, which is Sam Altman just announced in these past few days that they've got a lot of cool stuff, new models and shit that they want to release, but they can't because they don't have enough GPU power.
Yeah.
So now we need more energy, more data centers, more GPUs, which links to our discussion last week.
Our topic last week. For those that actually couldn't listen to that, we briefly discussed about the fact that Google recently had a deal to buy 7 nuclear reactors for energy production. And because they are, they're forecasting that that's going to be the next limitation, not only kind of on data center and GPU computation, but also like the hardware stuff, but also like energy to train and produce those models. So Google is a little bit ahead on that space, but which is not so surprising because they've been doing things in AI for a long time, so they know exactly what the requirements are. But yeah, now that Sam Altman a few months ago was in direct conversations with NVIDIA. Again, total speculation here, but we've been briefly discussing about it. What do you think is the reason why he is finding those obstacles now?
Well, I think there's
let's go on a speculation side.
Speculation side. So there's a bittersweet relationship that OpenAI has with Microsoft, which is very interesting because they've been sort of partners. Microsoft put a lot of money on them, but then Microsoft started going into a tangent of not being only OpenAI, and I think OpenAI was like, okay, so we're not the preferred suppliers anymore. And OpenAI also started partnering it up with other companies like Apple and, So I think that's starting to create this thing of we're not one company. We are helping each other, but we have our own goals.
We're not exclusive. It's an open relationship.
Open relationship, yeah.
It's more like it's not a marriage, it's more like Tinder dating.
Yes. Yeah. So I was like, give me the money, I'll buy the cars. But hey, look, if someone has more money than you, then I'm fine to get another car. So this is pretty interesting. So I don't know if Microsoft is playing hard and not giving them the GPU and the power that they need. Or if there's just not enough GPU in Microsoft data centers. But I know OpenAI a while back, and Sam Altman has spoken about this. He's been trying to capitalize, like I think it was like something around like $1 trillion or something like that. People can correct me on the amount. I'm not sure on the amount.
It was in the trillions.
It was on the trillions.
Yeah.
That he wanted to create his own data centers and on research on GPUs, so people are not depending on NVIDIA and Microsoft and these companies anymore, and AI can just grow and thrive. And I know they've been getting funding from big companies and big tech companies on that. So yeah, it's very interesting how things are evolving, how fast things are evolving. A lot of the players have become like monopoly in the market, like NVIDIA, which take to the discussion that now NVIDIA is the largest company in the US market.
Yep.
It has for the first time passed Apple. So yeah, so things are a bit crazy and the monopolies are too big. So, but then if OpenAI gets all the money that they need, they build all the infrastructure, they build all the data centers, they have all the GPU researches and factories and shit, does that mean that they will become the new monopoly? So it's like, how do we democratize this whole shit, right? Because it's too aggregated in one place at the moment. And yeah, that's the piece that I'm not really enjoying about this.
I think there's probably a two side to that conversation. So there is an angle to it, which is like when a lot of people and companies actually depend on technology, there is some sort of zero sum game that goes on where people can like try to concentrate all of their efforts in a particular players or set of players that actually provide that technology for them. And especially given that there are so many now companies like, financial services. I think recently actually JP Morgan and a few others have actually announced that they had actually built a whole bunch of infrastructure on top of an AI to create more efficiency in the way that they run their, financial models, etc. I know that there's a whole bunch of other banks that still are in those private conversations, so I cannot announce even if I know some other names, but actually it's not publicly available information. So when you have so many players kind of all using one supplier of technology, so you have a little bit of that concentration that actually happens.
Mm-hmm.
And the other aspect to it is that from a regulatory perspective as well, regulators usually they don't say this out loud because this is kind of not, the market doesn't like that, but other people don't like that, or the innovators don't like it. But the reality is actually the vast majority of regulators, they prefer that there's only a little set.
Yeah.
Because it's less complicated to innovate. I mean, I'll say that with respect for people that actually work in regulation. And I know that there are some people that are very hard, but at the top level of regulation, most of the time, people are actually lazy and they want just to regulate a set of people, a set of players, right? So if they can have just, a bunch less than 5 or so that they can regulate, and all the others are kind of like eventually pushed out of the market because of that regulation that they put, and they're okay with it, even though on the high level, they will tell everybody, oh, no, what we want is innovation, because innovation brings growth.
Yeah.
Growth kind of brings, new companies, brings entrepreneurs, brings investment, brings all that kind of stuff. Reality is actually like the business.
I think if we think like, if we go specifically into LLMs, the LLMs are so powerful at the moment. Like if you take Meta and Anthropic and, Claude, OpenAI, like Google, those models, they're so powerful. They're so big right now that, and they're expensive to run. Like you need lots of GPU, you need lots of power, like now, if we went back a year or maybe a little bit longer, but around a year's time, any startup could start a new LLM company. And that would be like, I think that would be possible,
Yeah.
But now things are so big and so complicated and so expensive that the market is centralized on those companies. And it's so hard for anyone else to come into the market because they would need like, I don't know, billions of dollars in funding or shit, whatever, to be able to have enough power and enough capacity to compete with the big players, unless they take a different niche.
Yeah, I think that depends on where they are in the stack, to be honest. What I'm saying, like from the VC world and the investment, is that yes, there is a big concentration on the players that are those that actually are training the model.
Yeah.
But there is quite a bit of competition going on around compute and around areas of the market that are not necessarily about training the models.
Yeah.
For example, trying to take a bit of market share from, for example, a player like NVIDIA, because they have a supply chain that they have significant amount of control. That's why they are so profitable. And that's why they can.
Well, I think like
they can have all
AMD and Intel. They will eventually start to catch up.
And even
right?
Newer players that actually are appealing to subset and niches of the population where people can just direct compute towards them.
Yeah.
And they can enable, for example, through brokers and et cetera, actually buying those machines from third-party suppliers through brokers that actually buy those machines and actually allocate for GPU computation. But then it will be through to platforms like DigitalOcean and all of those other computing platforms, right? That you can that you can use. So I know that there is quite an active market going around that.
Yeah.
And with companies that actually are getting investments from investors. And then there is a very active market on the application side.
Yeah, the usage of
it, right? I think what the concentration is really showing is on training and maintaining the top level models
which before everyone could go in, and now they can. And with regulations, will get even harder. I think that's the point that
and regulators, I think, will get in that because that is what is being used for both the applications and actually in the computer that is used to train those models, right? It's just that the actually the LLM production and the big LLM production, I think that there is a concentration there.
And that takes me to the next topic, but I just want to make a comment before we go into that. I just want to say that this is the first time that you finish your lunch before mine.
Oh, wow. This is we need to mark this day.
It's temperado.
For those that don't know, I usually eat and digest at the same time. So by the time that I finish eating, I'm already fully digested and I'm actually ready to
I eat in 10 minutes and Guilherme in 1 hour.
And that explains a lot of the time that actually our podcasts have taken as well in the past, because they are about the time that I finish eating. But in this case here, I finish eating actually faster than Andre.
Maybe I spoke more than you.
I'll put a trophy in my house actually about that one.
So that takes us to the next topic, which is, where do you think regulation for AI will move now that Trump is the new president and in this new area? Because I know looking to Elon Musk partnering up with Trump and a lot of those companies, and the way that Trump sort of looks for, the whole freedom of speech and less regulations, letting technology grow and stuff. And that's the reason why Elon Musk have put a lot of his cards on Trump. But what do you think? How do you think that this new wave now, the new Trump time, is going to be for technology? And I just want to say, politically here, William and I, we have no preference on U.S. elections, but we just want to comment about what has actually happened in the U.S. and how do we see that moving forward and the impact that that's going to have to the world. So AI, crypto, and we're going to talk a little bit about investment as well.
Yeah. So I think I think on that topic of regulation and where the Trump factor actually comes into play, is there are a few proxy signs of where we are going, and this is based on things that actually have started already during the time of the campaign. So these are not necessarily new things. It's just I think they might accelerate now that he is confirmed,
as the next president
in office, in actually, and the transition is ongoing. So Trump will most likely than not be a president focus on deregulation.
You think he's going to be focused on regulation?
On deregulation.
On deregulation.
Deregulation.
Okay.
So he will want to remove, I think, a lot of red tape and a lot of regulation from areas of technology that maybe the frameworks were not very clear.
Yeah.
Or maybe where agencies were not necessarily acting based on a predefined framework.
Okay. So there's a pros and cons for AI.
There is pros and cons for AI. There's pros and cons from other areas of the market, like digital assets. It's a big one.
Yeah. I know crypto's price have been sort of skyrocketing after he was confirmed.
And there are many.
That's probably one of the reasons.
There's many reasons for that. So like you just cite here, like just put a few examples here on the table. So the first, so on AI technology, I think Trump has a subset of Silicon Valley and Texas billionaires that are, very close to him, right? The likes, just here to quote a few examples, the likes of Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Mark Anderson, which is actually one of the co-founders of A16Z, which is one of the biggest actually funds in the crypto in crypto and in other areas of technology in the Silicon Valley. I know a whole bunch of people actually from Y Combinator and related actually kind of like ecosystems as actually they're very, very behind. And he's got a support base, has had the support base of a lot of, males and young males. A lot of them.
And Satoshi Nakamoto.
maybe Satoshi in space. So that kind of like sends you really kind of like a signal of prior to the election. On the digital asset space, he's been very vocal about wanting to make some of the digital asset startups to either come back to the US or kind of like work from the US, being regulated or not regulated by US agencies. And he's promised doing quite a few actions the first day of office. One of them is actually he promised that he's going to fire the current chair of the SEC, which is the Securities and Exchange Commission in the United States, which is the primary kind of securities regulator.
Right.
So he's going to actually. So there was a lot of memes circulating on Twitter with like the logo of Gary Gensler, which is the current chairman of the SEC. On his photo of LinkedIn and open to work, kind of like that. so you can already see where things are going.
Okay.
So this is one thing. The other area, which Trump has been very vocal, is to use Bitcoin, as a reserve asset and actually pass a law through that. There's a law that is actually in draft mode now. It's called actually the Bitcoin Act.
Okay.
That has already been drafted and it hasn't been reviewed yet.
So if that passes, the price of Bitcoin is going to fucking skyrocket.
So the objective of that law is that the Federal Reserve, the main central bank of the United States, will be required to hold, I think is about 1% of the circulating supply of Bitcoin.
Wow.
Which is something along to like 200,000 equivalent of Bitcoin.
So the price is going to go crazy.
I mean, if that becomes a trend and other central banks follow suit then you could imagine that, if other central banks that hold reserve assets such as gold that they do in their balance sheets, then you could have a snowballing effect. Assuming that other central banks actually follow the Federal Reserve and assuming that...
Yeah, but I mean, the US is big enough for the Federal Reserve to make some impact in the economy.
Oh, huge. Yeah. I mean, that's big. So yeah, that's one of the things. Trump himself, he's got a family startup that's called World Financial or World Digital Financial, one of those names, which is the same, World Liberty Financial, which him and some of his sons actually are involved, and they essentially want to deal with securities and digital assets and digital form.
Okay, so he's
actually quite involved in the industry.
Okay, so he's gonna make that easier.
he's quite involved in the industry, right?
Right.
So you have all of those
I didn't know that.
all of those things actually been happening over the last things. Betting has been a big factor during this US election. So there is one of the biggest betting platforms that's called Polymarket. Is a crypto trading and betting platform.
How does that work?
So people essentially can use their stable coins actually to bet on a outcome. It's a prediction market platform. You have essentially a topic, say who will win the US election. Yeah. Then you have two sides of the market, and those that actually are on the losing side, they pay for.
So that's all smart contract automated.
This is smart contract behind of the platforms, and then once the outcome is confirmed, the odds and those that actually betted on a particular odd actually pays the ones that actually won the bet. Those platforms have been extremely active during
Really?
They were quoted in every single news media, Bloomberg and etc. Like Polymarket was quoted all over the place.
Right.
And of course, there's been some people that actually bet quite large. In fact, there's one guy, I think that actually bet won as much as $18 million with the Trump win on the platform. And
how are those platforms regulated? They're not.
The betting platforms are not regulated in most countries, right? So, because you can bet on.
No, but I mean, if they are in the US, running in the US, and they're not regulated.
I'm not sure if the Polymarket is actually running the US, and I'm sure that the participants in that betting were not only Americans either. It was there were people from all over the world actually.
Because I thought that for you to have a betting platform that is enabled in the US for people to use, it would need it to be regulated in American soil, which means that if it's online and people from the US are using it, it needs to be regulated, or else American people.
But again, depends on the market. I think the betting, a lot of activities that actually happen on the betting markets, as you have betting markets for sports and for things, right? So they don't necessarily have a particular type of regulation. Again, I'm not as expert in that area of regulation for betting and
need a financial advisor
and gambling markets. But this is being actually a platform that has quoted all over the news because it was one of the top ones actually being used. That a lot of pundits in the media were actually using as a proxy for saying the betting markets are making the sound that Trump is gonna win.
Right.
So people actually are putting their money to say that Trump is going to win. But of course, some platforms, Polymarket, for example, appeals to a particular population, crypto bros, etc., and people involved in digital assets, which of course have a bias to it because has a lot to win if Trump wins. But anyways, there's all these factors that we're talking about, Bitcoin reserves, the Bitcoin Act coming out, Trump being involved in at least one crypto business, if not more. Trump came to the Bitcoin conference that was held in Miami this year and actually made a big talk, including the talk about firing the current SEC and installing crypto-friendly kind of.
It might be the new crypto era now, because if Trump pushes that in the US is such a big market that things will start moving, because crypto has grown in the last few years, not as fast as artificial intelligence. I think markets, but the things are around regulations and uncertainties and unknowns and risks, and the general population are still getting their head around crypto. A lot of people have tried, and
a lot of people were victims to scams, right?
Scams. So I think once a big country like the US says, all right, we all own this now, I think it's going to create this new digital asset in crypto era. At least that's my view.
I mean, there's a lot of people with.
I mean, like, it's not El Salvador, it's the US. Yeah.
No. There's a lot of people with stakes in the market, and I think there's also a lot of people, again, talking back to some of the billionaires that actually I mentioned before. There's a lot of those billionaires that actually are quite involved in the crypto sphere. Like Peter Thiel has been involved, and there's, Mark Anderson, people from A16 that have been actually have managed big crypto funds that actually invest in those startups, in the biggest startups, and a lot of those folks, or the CEO, ex-CEO of Binance, for example, right? CZ, which has been just released from prison after 4 months in prison, when he was retained in the US. So I don't know about CZ, but a lot of the others actually, they have actually made significant donations actually to the crypto, to the Trump campaign.
Right.
And this campaign was the most expensive campaign in US history.
Wow.
Both sides, both candidates. They had, I think, more than $3 billion worth of funding.
Jesus Christ.
It's crazy amounts.
Yeah.
How much could you actually have solved in people's lives if you actually had invested that instead of having a
it's probably like
2-year running campaign, right?
But it's probably all the money of some countries around the world.
It's big. It's significant what happened. So anyway, all of those things send a message that there is going to be a significant amount of deregulation. And I think, again, I'm here talking about digital assets because Trump has been very vocal, and I'm very close with that space. But it's beyond digital assets. I think AI is going to be touched by that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's probably one of the reasons why Elon Musk is putting so much effort. Was putting so much effort on Trump's campaign as well, because he's got a lot of interest on it.
Elon Musk is a bit of a different thing, and again.
But he's got interest on crypto. He's got interest on regulations. He got interest on freedom of speech. He got interest on all those sort of topics that we just talked about. So.
Elon Musk is a different set, I think, of interest at play there, which might be of even a higher order of magnitude, right? So Trump, the way that I see it is that Elon Musk was making an investment into the Trump campaign, which he will recoup that investment 100-fold easily. And I'll give you kind of like some of the stuff. I mean, if Trump goes forward with the policies that he's talked about during the campaign, here's what is likely to happen. So he's promised, first and foremost, there is still a role to be filled in which Elon Musk would be the Doge, essentially kind of like the officer of government efficiency, which he will manage.
Okay, so there's a role in government.
There is a role in government for Musk, which will be about creating efficiency into governments.
Right.
And he will essentially, when we talk about the regulation, we're essentially kind of like Elon Musk himself will be a big central player, a deregulator for the industries, including some of the industries that he manages himself. So I don't know how they are going to actually manage conflicts of interest. Not that Trump cares so much about that stuff.
But I can see like the world where, like XAI getting exposure, or maybe some benefits on some new deregulation.
SpaceX
because
have significant benefits because they have
not even talking about that.
They have huge contracts already with the space agencies in the United States, and those contracts are only likely to be.
Is that only NASA, or are they involved with the military as well?
Yeah, I think both. Okay,
of them. So that will. Yeah, that would just blow out of proportion if that's happening.
And when you look at from that point of view, kind of like the investment of Elon Musk into with the donations is peanuts relative to what he's going to take on top of it. other thing is that Trump is promising to implement trade barriers to balance with particularly with China, but also other countries are likely to be impacted by those trade barriers.
Anything that can protect the internal sort of market and production, right?
He's trying to do what the Latin American countries did in the 1960s and 80s with the substitution of imports policies.
It didn't work very well.
So. It didn't work at all. It was.
So I don't know if that's a good idea.
It was a disaster.
I think instead of taxing things that are coming from other countries so they become so expensive that you have to invest in the internal market, because that's going to generate inflation, right? You need to create ways of your production getting cheaper so people are consuming from your own country.
So let's work through that.
Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack in just what you said there. Okay. So just kind of like wrapping up on the things I think with Elon Musk. So with the barriers to competitors, for example, in the EV market and things like this, Tesla is likely to take even a bigger market share in the internal market, because BYD will no longer be competitive actually to import it into the US and actually sold to Americans, right?
Yeah. But I know Trump also has a lot of the eyes backing sort of oil and gas.
Yeah. So that whole kind of industry of the ESG industry and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
will be a lot of things.
I just mean that in the US market, I think, if I think of the US, because the US is like the dominant country in the world with sort of oil at the moment, even if they're not the producers, they're the buyers.
No, they're the best.
They are the producers.
The biggest producer.
There's a lot of production in other countries that their companies are there and they're importing that oil, right?
Yeah.
But for them to invest on the EV market, they need to do some sort of strategy on sort of subsidizing people to buy cars or something like that. Because if they just make the price of Chinese cars more expensive, that's not gonna, it will make Elon Musk sell more cars, yes.
Yeah.
Will it make the market become electric dominant? Probably not, which I know is sort of Elon Musk's goal, right? So for that goal to be achieved, you either start banning the sort of cars that are polluting, like petrol cars and diesel, or you start making cars cheaper, right? Like
So coming back to unpacking and the impact of some of those policies, right? So let's say here the US goes ahead and puts, as usually Trump, when he says things, people actually don't believe,
because he talks a lot of
crap. But actually, when you look back after he talks about this stuff, he tends actually to implement those things anyways. So let's just take for his word for face value, right? So he is talking about a tariff barrier on imported goods goods and services from China of 50 to 60% increase on tariff barriers.
I just want to say that I don't like that at all.
I mean, the whole world has passed that phase of actually putting barriers and using barriers as bargaining
the world
chips
is
for a long time.
It's so globalized right now.
But it's going in a deglobalization trend to an extent. How long that's going to? Yeah, I have no crystal ball for that.
But that's probably going to create lots of tensions between the US and China.
Very possibly.
Which we're not in the right time of history for that to be happening, right?
No, we're not. But so there's the China factor, and then there's the rest of the world, including Europe, which US are also big trading partners with the European Union. And there in that space, they are promising to do a tariff in the range of 10 to 20%.
So let me ask you a question. So I know China is not the biggest consumptions of US goods. They are importers, but not exporters. Well, they are, but not as big, right?
Well, they're exporters because there's a lot of American companies that are based in China.
No, I know, but I'm saying they probably import more from China than they export to China.
The US.
Yeah, the US.
Yeah.
But Europe is probably
It's
a
similar.
little bit different.
It's a little bit similar. They also export.
They
China
export a lot
exports
to Europe. They export a lot to South America.
Yeah.
So if they start putting tariffs, people will do the same in the other.
Yeah, and that's the other side of the coin.
So
right?
you're becoming like a
when
Cuba.
when you put tariffs on your side, usually the other countries say like, yeah, that's cool. You impose tariffs on us, we're not going to do anything with you. Usually that's reciprocal to start with, right?
Yeah.
Right, so tariffs tends to be reciprocal.
Yeah.
So it's like
unless your internal market can balance the demand and supply, that's not a great idea.
Okay, so let's go through that. So if you put tariffs on imported goods, people think about goods as like just manufactured goods, but there's actually a lot of input material.
There's lots of stuff.
There's a lot of input materials that goes into producing goods. And all of those input materials will come into the US because the US cannot produce everything.
Yeah.
All of those input materials will come at a more costly for US manufacturers now that it's trying to bootstrap.
The prices will go up.
Some of those manufacturers are either not as established or not as competitive as they are overseas. Again, substitution of imports that we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So imagine now that actually that is manufactured in the US with a less competitive kind of like industry because, for example, like semiconductors, let's use, they're not TSMC that produces a very competitive rates with a global supply chain out of Taiwan. They are going to be new build guys or guys that are now small that will have to scale again. Taking in input materials that are more costly. The other input materials that will come, the other input resources is labor. Labor is also much costly because they live
all I'm hearing you saying is inflation.
It's inflation on both two sides of the inflation spectrum. You have inflation on tradable goods, which are those that actually are important, and you have non-tradable inflation, which is actually usually domestically grown inflation, because those goods then become more costly to produce in your country. And then once you've produced them and you try to sell in your country, then there is the non-tradable part of inflation, which is people that are buying because they're buying everything into a high wage economy. They're going to have to buy that for a higher cost as well.
Yeah.
The same goods that they would buy for a much lower cost if it was a
and the biggest thing of the US since like the end of the Second World War is that the US has always been like a really cheap country. So that's why people always felt really rich in the US because they could buy a lot of stuff because everything is so cheap. But now the US is, well, by the conversation that we're having, there's a chance that the US might change their policies to say, all right, you know how all those dumb countries did that shit in the past and they fucked up themselves? Yeah. We're going to do that now.
Yeah. and now let's just like rewind not very long ago, just like in the last year or so, all of the countries that have, had a inflation spike that hasn't been the case in 10, sometimes even 40 years for countries. Yes. What happened actually after you actually increase the costs of goods and services in the goods and services market? What happens to the labor market?
Oh, they get screwed because
people also
want more
start
money.
Actually asking for higher wages. So a reinforcement cycle, right? So
they want more money, and then you want to be more efficient, and then you could have to charge more so you can pay people. You can't get all the labor that you need, and then that cycle starts again.
And eventually, what happens with the company's profitability?
Goes down, and they
crashes because the costs are high. And then what happens to the labor market?
Yeah, the labor market
starts firing people. It starts firing people, right?
And then they can't buy stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. So here's, don't have a crystal ball.
Yeah, but that's what it feels like. It's gonna happen.
So in terms,
unless they replace everything by AI and robots,
possibly. But again,
and blockchain,
assuming that then the cost of electricity is not gonna go up.
Yeah, but then, so imagine that you created, so everything is expensive now. You don't have enough labor, and you're putting AI, machinery, blockchain, automating the whole shit, right? If people are not working and not making money, they're not going to buy products. So you can have the cheapest and more efficient business in the world. If you don't have people to buy it,
Yeah, and then you don't have growth, and you have inflation. Stagflation. So
you need to keep people employed so you can get them to buy your stuff.
This brings up to Latin America in the 80s. In the 80s, inflation of 1,000%.
Yeah, or even Argentina recently.
And unemployment, huge amounts of unemployed people.
Oh man.
So again, okay, but to the positive stuff here on the market. Well, positive, we'll see. Depends on portfolio and how.
Stock market has been skyrocketing.
So in the short, again, not financial advice. This is for informational only. So so what happens when inflation goes up? Where do people actually hedge their assets?
Stock market?
No.
Bonds, gold,
commodities, because it's actually inflation.
If bonds are paying well, people will go to bonds or treasure.
Have a look at what's happening in the bond market now, because usually those markets actually try to predict the future trends already. Look at the bond curve and how it's
because
changed.
Usually what you do is, so let's say you've got a lot of money in the stock market, then let's say the economy is becoming inflationary. You take the money out of the stock market. You usually go to fixed rate assets like some of the bonds, or even like treasure that is paying well, or you go to assets like housing and gold and things like that, right?
You go to inflation protection
inflation
assets.
protection.
But the inflation protection assets are not necessarily bonds. Bonds are not actually good at that because, and I'll explain the dynamic there. Bonds, when it comes to interest rates, bond traders, the thing that they are the most afraid of is inflation. So then you start actually seeing interest rate curves of bonds, especially the ones that are interest rate kind of sensitive, like 2-year and 10-year, and not so much 10-year, but 2-year bonds. They start ramping up because investors are expecting to be paid more if the inflation is higher. Yeah. Because they measure their profitability based on the inflation, a real yield, rather than just like the base yield. And if inflation expectations is expected actually to go higher, then investors start selling those bonds.
Yeah, if the bond is not like inflation plus something, right?
Yeah, and then people might try to hedge through, for example, like TIPS, what they call like inflation protected bonds. Yeah. To maintain that. Yeah. To maintain the value of the bond, which is like
what Warren Buffett has been doing. So in the last few months, Warren Buffett has been selling a lot of stocks and putting somewhere else. So would you say he was already expecting this to happen, or?
I'm not sure, because most of the time
because he's a smart guy. So
yeah, he is.
Do you think he was sort of expecting like Trump's going to win, the things are going to change, is the time that I need to take that money, put somewhere else so I don't get impacted by it?
I'm not sure whether he was thinking already that far, and that, or whether he was expecting that inflation was going to be a factor. To be honest, I think most investors were not necessarily expecting that inflation was going to be a problem unless Trump won, even though there is a fiscal side of things to the US. So the balance sheet of the US was going to grow regardless of the administration. But some of the Trump policies will make it, I think, a little bit more inflationary. So some of those investors might have, tried to think about what kind of like inflation protected assets actually I can put my money into. Real estate, commodities, etc. tend to be safe havens. But in the short term, I think we're gonna see that
spike in gold,
that is spiking in assets like the stock market. Simply because there is also another side of Trump's policy, which is about reducing the corporate the corporate tax rate. Right. By about half, I think.
So he wants to ferment business.
And then the stock market, of course, because they're going to have to pay less taxes, then those companies will produce, higher net profits, right?
Yeah.
Like not necessarily earnings, but net profits will be higher.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of dynamics that actually are playing amongst the policies that Trump said that he was going to implement.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting to see what's going to happen with the market. And we're not even talking about the other subjects like around the world impact and wars and things like that. That
we
can
haven't
be
even
a
touched
whole
that. It's
different
a whole
topic for another day. But
yeah,
it's lots of mixed dynamics. Let's see how that's going to play out.
Yeah, portfolio managers are definitely paying close attention to all of what's going to happen here.
I did see all my investments like picking up from the day that Trump was announced. I was like, wow, this is crazy ride, man. Yeah. So I was even thinking like, should I take the money out? Is that going to drop? But I'll probably going to risk it and keep it for a little bit longer.
The second order effects we're only going to see when he actually takes office, because those are the order effects like tariffs and things like this. He cannot do any of that kind of stuff.
And depends on the order. It depends on the order that he does
of implementation as well.
If he implements tax reduction first, the stock market is probably going to be booming for a little bit longer, and you're probably going to see the unemployment rates dropping because companies will have more money, they'll hire more people.
And there will be, the earnings expectations will be matched by the companies, so they are not going to...
But I think when he starts to implement all those sort of foreign policies is when we might see the side effect of that. So I think it depends on the order that he does things, right?
Of implementation of those policies and how tensions it's going to be as well.
Yeah.
We haven't even talked about the military side of things, but there is a whole relationship that especially the Europeans, I think they're a bit scared and they're trying to prepare now because they have seen these things.
And if he takes,
his relationship with NATO and NATO countries. Yeah.
And if he takes the money from the Ukraine, like this, let's not go down that.
There is a lot to unpack. There is a lot to unpack there. I don't know how much that has a direct impact on the economy and the markets. Direct impact on the economy and the markets, I don't know. Maybe something that might have a higher geopolitical impact is going to be the relationship between Israel and Iran.
Yeah, as well. Yeah.
Because that part, how is he going to act with Israel, and what order effects and how much care there will be in terms of the dealing with Iran.
Yeah.
That's going to be, I think that part causes me a little bit more
tension,
more concern than the one with Vladimir Putin.
I don't know. I
Ukraine.
think both of them, because I don't know. Like, I feel like he's probably going to try to push Ukraine to make some deal with Russia, and I don't think Europe is going to like that.
No, Europe will not like that aspect, and will probably have to either bow or finance the remaining. I suppose. I think the goal of Trump, because this was another thing from his campaign, he was quite proud to say that the US was not managing, I don't know how much that is true, but the US was not managing any conflicts during his time.
Yeah.
And
he said he's gonna bring the world into peace. Let's see.
Let's see. I think now the Trump version 2.0 is something that at least some countries or some leaders already know what to expect because they have seen the first version of it.
A bit more crazy and confident.
I don't know. We will see.
Just for us
a bit older.
Just for us to wrap up, I didn't want to tell you a curiosity that I saw last night. So Putin, he made a deal with North Korea. I don't know if you saw that.
No, I haven't.
So what is happening now is they're using a lot of North Korean soldiers in the Russian and Ukraine special military, whatever fuck it calls, the war, right?
The war.
So he's using a lot of soldiers from North Korea now in the war to fight alongside with Russia. What's happening is they talk different languages. They don't understand each other. North Korea is supplying all the ammunitions and it seems like 80% of the ammunitions don't work. So they've got like soldiers
bullets,
sort of triaging bullets that they can use and cleaning shit and stuff like that. And in the video, so I was seeing like a documentary last night, and some Russian soldiers, they are giving themselves up to Ukraine because they're saying that North Koreans don't understand them, don't understand the strategy, and they started shooting other Russians.
Holy shit.
And some soldiers from North Korea found as a path to escape from North Korea, and they changing sides and fighting against the Russians.
Oh, wow.
Wow, man, that's mental.
Is that kind of confirmed? Is
Yeah,
like
it is
reports,
confirmed, like,
or is it more like a conspiracy?
So in the documentary that I was watching last night, like they had like like videos from Russian soldiers like calling their family and showing them cleaning like armor, like bullets and rockets and stuff like that, like all the supplies that they're getting from North Korea. And I saw like a Russian guy being interviewed by Ukraine saying, I just give up, like now that they got, I don't know how many soldiers from Korea, they started shooting us and shit like that. And and I saw like Koreans saying that they never want to go back to Korea, so they align now with Zelensky to have an opportunity to get into Europe.
Wow!
So that is crazy.
that is probably, it's almost like for another episode.
Yeah,
talking about
the war.
The war.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it's not gonna be lunch tech and chat at that point in time, I suppose.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Thanks for everyone that listened us to the end. Almost an hour talking, but a lot of interesting stuff. Thanks, William, once again.
It was a US election special today.
Yeah.
The post-US election.
I know there's lots of good stuff that will be happening in the next few days. You're going to be going to Bangkok. I'm going to be going to London.
Yeah.
Lots of things that we're going to be seeing and hearing and listening and learning and discussing. So we're going to have lots of topics when we are back.
Yeah. And I think for a future episode, we can probably talk a little bit about some of the most exciting stuff that we're going to be seeing on both our respective worlds. You in the world of the world of AI, in your interactions in London, and myself, the conference in Bangkok, which will be fully focused on the latest product in development in the digital asset space.
See if you get to interview someone over there, that would be cool.
I'll try. It's going to be more a developer and product focused this time.
Yeah.
It's going to be a little bit less about, companies doing marketing and growth hacking and stuff like this. It's going to be much more focused on product.
Nice.
So we'll see if I can actually find some interesting people to talk about.
Cool. Thanks, everyone, and see you next time.
Thank you.